good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we will move slowly through the world of the Silk Road after dark, where camel bells were muted by distance, where market lamps made small islands of light, and where cities seemed to gather their breath behind walls of mud, brick, and stone. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through history, you can subscribe and return whenever you want something calm to listen to, and you're welcome to leave a gentle comment too, perhaps sharing where you're listening from tonight, or what restful topic you might like to explore next. Now, settle in comfortably and let the room grow a little quieter. Imagine the day loosening its grip, one thread at a time, as we begin on roads that connected continents, and on nights that carried traders, stories, spices, silk, and dust across a very wide world. The Silk Road was never only one road. It was many roads and many pauses and many evenings. It was a web of paths stretching across deserts, mountains, grasslands, and river valleys, linking China to Central Asia, Persia, the Eastern Mediterranean, and beyond. In daylight it could be harsh and bright, all glare and heat and wind, but at night it changed. The same route that had seemed severe and endless in the sun could become quieter, softer, almost reflective, as if the land itself had decided to lower its voice. A caravan moving after sunset would not hurry. It could not. The animals needed patience and the path needed attention. A line of camels, each with its burden tied in balanced loads, would step forward with a slow, rolling rhythm. Their pace was steady and their shadows stretched long in the moonlight. A traveller might hear the faint creak of wood, the brushing of cloth, a low call from the rear of the line, and then after a little while nothing but wind. There is something calming in the idea that so much of the ancient world depended on such unhurried movement. Trade was not always dramatic. It was often repetitive, practical, almost tender in its own way. Someone packed goods carefully. Someone checked water skins. Someone chose the safest route around a dune or a ridge. Someone counted the animals and made sure none had strayed. Many of the grand things we remember from history began as these small acts, repeated under very large skies. At night the desert seemed larger. The stars above the caravan were not decoration, not background, but a kind of working map. Travelers learned to read them with the same attention that others gave to road markers or city gates. The North Star, the sweep of constellations, the angle of the moon, all of these mattered. A clear night could be a blessing. A moonlit plain might reveal the line of a track, the edge of a well, the outline of a hill where a rest stop waited. Yet the same darkness could also hide a false path, a dry wash, a patch of soft sand. And so the caravan travelled with both caution and trust. Caution in the feet, trust in the habits of the road. This balance is one of the quiet wonders of Silk Road life. People were constantly entering places they did not fully know, yet they relied on memory, custom, and the kindness of those who had gone before. There were guides who knew the land by scent and shadow. There were merchants who had crossed the same stretches many times. There were innkeepers and guards and porters and translators, all holding together a system that was never simple, but often remarkably resilient. If we follow the route westward in our imagination, we begin to find cities that woke, even at night, in a softer way. A caravan arriving after dusk would not always find silence. Instead, it might find a city that shimmered in layers. The outer roads were dark. The walls stood like shadow. But inside there could be glow from bathhouses, from workshops still finishing a task, from tea houses or courtyards where people sat a little later than usual. A city along the Silk Road was not just a destination. It was a meeting place for languages, fabrics, coins, recipes, and beliefs. And often, the city had its own evening rhythm. Merchants closed their stalls with the same care that they had opened them. Porters carried the last bundles through narrow lanes. A baker might still be at work, the smell of warm bread lingering in a district where travelers were thinking about their next meal. Somewhere nearby, a scribe might be copying accounts by lamplight. Someone else might be wrapping bolts of silk in cloth, protecting them from dust and damp. These are small scenes, but they help us understand what trade really meant. It was not only about wealth, it was about continuity. It was about keeping useful things moving and keeping people connected. The Silk Road also depended on pauses. Caravanserais, those roadside inns and stopping places, were among the most important parts of the system. They gave travelers a place to rest, water their animals, share news, and sleep with some measure of safety. At night, a caravanserai could feel like a miniature world. In one courtyard, a fire might burn low. In another, a merchant from a distant land might speak in a language unfamiliar to the man beside him, yet both might understand the value of tea, salt, and a dry place to sit. In these places, the night became communal. Boots were removed, saddles were loosened, packages were opened and checked. A small argument might be settled, a price might be discussed in murmurs. Then, gradually, the sounds thinned out. A dog barked once, a horse shifted in its stall, someone coughed. Someone else turned over in sleep. And above all this, the desert remained patient, circling the walls in darkness. It is easy, when thinking about the Silk Road, to imagine only luxury goods. Silk itself, of course, became famous. It was delicate, valuable, and often traveled through many hands before reaching the places that prized it most. But the road carried much more than silk. It carried metalwork, paper, glass, wool, dyes, perfumes, nuts, dried fruit, medicines, tools, ideas, and religious texts. It carried habits as much as objects. A style of cup could move from one region to another. A method of making paper could travel. A story could cross a mountain range and settle into a new language. And this, perhaps, is one of the most restful thoughts to sit with tonight. The world has always been more connected than it first appears. Even in times that seem far away and dim, people were noticing one another. They were borrowing, adapting, translating, remembering. The Silk Road was a place where this happened continuously, and quietly, in markets and tents and courtyards and border towns. At night, the desert markets were different from the daytime ones, but not entirely empty. Some markets were most active in the cooler hours, when the heat had softened and people could breathe more easily. Lanterns would hang from beams or stand in niches, giving the stalls a warm amber glow. The light caught on brass bowls, on woven baskets, on scales used for weighing spices or tea, on the glassiness of small bottles. Fabric moved gently in the breeze. Smoke from cooking fires drifted upward, carrying the scent of onions, lamb, sesame, or cardamom. A market by night had its own mood. It was less hurried, perhaps, and more intimate. Voices travelled a little farther in the cool air. A customer could stand and examine a bolt of cloth without the noon sun pressing down. A seller might unwrap an item carefully, letting the lamp reveal its colour and weave. The language of trade was partly spoken, partly gestured. Fingers pointed, heads tilted. Coins were counted into the palm, then counted again. These little exchanges, repeated again and again, formed the practical heartbeat of the Silk Road. There were also moments of stillness. A merchant waiting for a buyer might lean against a post and look up at the sky. A child might drift close to a stall and stare at the contents of a lacquered box or a stack of dried figs. An old traveller might sit on a low stool and simply listen. Night markets, for all their movement, could be oddly restful in memory, perhaps because they preserved a balance between commerce and shelter, noise and pause. The farther a caravan travelled, the more the route changed shape. In some places, the road hugged the edge of a desert basin, where oases appeared like small miracles of green. In other places, it ran near high passes and cold air, where snow could linger and breathing felt thin. The Silk Road was not one environment, but many, and night gave each of them a different face. In the desert, darkness widened space. In the mountains, it sharpened outlines. In the cities, it softened stone and brought lamplight forward. One can imagine a traveller reaching an oasis town just after dusk. The date palms would be dark shapes against a deep blue sky. Water channels might glimmer briefly as they passed through gardens. A wall would protect the settlement from wind and sand. Inside, there might be a bazaar lane, half opened for the evening, with baskets of apricots, bundles of herbs, and pottery lined up near the front of a stall. The air would feel cooler near the water. The traveler, after many miles, would notice every small kindness. A bowl offered, a place to sit, a stable for the animals, a question asked in a careful voice. These towns depended on movement, but they also depended on waiting. Someone had to be ready when the caravan arrived. Someone had to know the price of grain, the condition of roads ahead, the rumors of weather or bandits or political tension. A merchant did not simply carry goods, they carried information. In a very old world, news traveled with the same wagons and saddlebags as silk and spice. A border changed and the change had to be known. A bridge failed and the failure had to be passed along. A safe crossing, a friendly official, a market with good demand, all of this became part of the invisible cargo. At night, stories also moved more easily. Around a fire, people spoke of places they had seen, rivers they had crossed, monasteries, temples, strong walls, and cities whose names might sound musical to those hearing them for the first time. Some stories were practical, meant to warn or guide. Others were simply human, a strange custom in a distant province, a generous innkeeper, a beautiful gate, a song remembered from home. These fragments of experience passed from person to person helped travelers feel less alone. The Silk Road was often imagined as a path of luxury, but it was also a path of endurance. Many of the people who used it were not wealthy in the way rulers were wealthy. They were drivers, loaders, guards, packers, translators, and modest traders who made a living through patience. They measured the worth of a journey not only in profit, but in survival, reputation, and the quiet success of arriving intact. Night travel could be exhausting, yet it also offered relief from the sun. The stars did not care about contracts or taxes. They simply continued, which may have been comforting in its own way. And perhaps that is why the Silk Road at night feels so easy to imagine. Darkness blurs the sharp edges of history. It allows us to feel the human scale of things. A vast network becomes, for a moment, a line of lanterns. An empire becomes a gate opening to a courtyard. 1,000 miles becomes a road beneath a camel's feet. We can picture a hand tightening a strap, a cup being filled, a rider pausing to listen, and in these simple actions the enormous world becomes understandable. If we linger a little longer beside the road, we might notice how carefully animals were treated. Camels were essential in arid lands, not because they were romantic symbols, but because they were practical companions. They could carry weight, cross difficult ground, and tolerate conditions that would be punishing for many other animals. Their presence shaped the pace of trade. A caravan advanced according to their needs as much as the needs of the people. Water stops were planned around them. Feed was gathered for them. At night, when they finally knelt and rested, the whole camp could feel a little calmer. There was a particular quiet that came after the animals were secured and the loads unpacked. It was the kind of quiet that belongs to labor completed for the moment. Someone might mend a rope. Someone might brush dust from a blanket. Someone else might sit near a low fire and drink a little broth or tea. These were not dramatic events, but they carried the feeling of survival, of order maintained through ordinary care. The great cities along the Silk Road had their own nightlife too, though it was often more subdued than we might expect. In some places, large gates closed at certain hours and movement became more restricted. Yet within the walls, the city never fully slept. Guards patrolled. Watchmen listened. Courtyards held small pockets of activity. In districts tied to trade, there might be constant preparation for the next day. Goods had to be sorted, documents had to be checked, language interpreters had to be found, diplomatic visitors might arrive with their own retinues. A city was, among other things, a machine for receiving strangers. This makes the Silk Road feel surprisingly modern in one sense. So much depended on logistics. Routes had to be known, supplies had to be managed. Trust had to be established across great distances. Networks of credit, protection, and reputation mattered as much as the goods themselves. A famous city did not just attract traders because it was large. It attracted them because it had developed a reliable rhythm, one that could absorb arrivals, sort them, and send them on again. In this way, the road was not only a line on a map, it was a repeated act of confidence. Confidence that the next oasis would still be there, confidence that the innkeeper would have space, confidence that the pass would be open, confidence that the moon would rise, confidence that the world, though immense, could be crossed in careful stages. Sometimes the night itself would seem to guide the journey. Without the harshness of direct sunlight, colors deepened. The white of a tent might glow faintly. A ruby-colored textile could appear almost black until lifted near a lamp. Bronze buckles, iron tools, glass beads, and polished wood all took on a subtler life after dusk. This is one of the reasons nighttime is such a natural companion to memory. Things are not overexposed. They settle into shape. They become easier to hold in the mind. Imagine for a moment a merchant opening a chest in the half-light. Inside there may be folded silk, dry spices sealed in cloth, small weights used for scales, a letter tied with string, and a little pouch of coins. Each item is both practical and symbolic. The cloth says where the merchant has been, the spices suggest what climates they crossed, the letter hints at contacts elsewhere. The coins, worn smooth by use, show that value itself travelled and changed form. Even the dust of the road had meaning. It settled on hems, on saddlebags, on the hides of animals, on the rims of water vessels. A traveller could look at the layer of dust on their hands and know something of the day behind them. There is a humility in that. The world does not preserve the road in pure form. It marks the traveller, and the traveller marks the road in return. History, too, is like this. It is not always a clean line of monuments. Sometimes it is dust, stitched cloth, a broken jug, a worn threshold, a note in the margin of a ledger. And the Silk Road survives in this way through traces. Some routes changed over time. Some cities rose and fell. Some markets shifted. Some languages faded and others took their place. Yet the image of lamps shining in a desert market or a caravan crossing under calm moon remains compelling because it captures something durable about human life. We move toward each other. We trade what we have. We carry pieces of one place into another. We rest and then we continue. There is also, tucked inside the Silk Road, a quieter story about curiosity. People often traveled because they wanted profit, yes, but also because they wanted to know. What is sold in that distant city? What script do they use there? What do they eat? What prayers do they hear? What does the river smell like in spring? Curiosity is a gentle force, and in the ancient world it could change hands just like cloth or silver. A trader heard a phrase and carried it home. A monk saw a manuscript and remembered it. A cook tasted a spice and adapted a recipe. In this way, curiosity traveled without needing a caravan of its own. Night made room for wonder because it slowed the eye. In the day, everything competed for attention. At night, one lamp, one face, one road, one star could occupy the mind entirely. A traveller resting beneath a canopy might listen to the sounds outside and think of places yet to come. Perhaps a desert fortress, perhaps a mountain monastery. Perhaps a city where paper was made in large quantities, or a port where foreign ships waited for inland goods. The route was long, and that longness itself could be soothing when considered from a place of safety. We can think of the Silk Road as a series of thresholds: city gate to open road, road to caravanserai, caravanserai to market, market to palace, monastery, or workshop. Every threshold implied a change in light and sound. Night highlighted these changes. The gate was darker than the street. The courtyard was calmer than the market. The inn was warmer than the road. In a life shaped by travel, a simple wall with a door might mean rest, and rest meant everything. The people who kept these spaces running were often unseen in grand histories, yet they were central to the whole system. Stable workers, cooks, guards, scribes, wagon repairers, animal handlers, tea sellers, water carriers, and interpreters all formed part of the Silk Road's living fabric. They understood that trade depended on care. A broken wheel could delay a journey. A neglected animal could end one. A mistranslated agreement could cause trouble. So the road asked for 1,000 small attentions, and in return it created connection over enormous distances. At the edge of some desert towns, you might have found simple cemeteries or shrines, places where travelers paused briefly before moving on. Night gave these places a hushed dignity. A person might stop, bow their head, and then continue toward the light of the town. Such moments remind us that travel was never only about commerce, it was also about risk, faith, and hope. People crossed hard places because they believed the next place mattered. The Silk Road is often described in global terms, and that is right, but it was experienced locally, step by step. One oasis, one checkpoint, one meal, one night's lodging. One exchange of words, one bundle tied onto a camel. The enormous system was built from small acts repeated with care. That may be one of the most comforting lessons hidden inside it. Most large things are made from manageable ones. A road is only a road because countless feet have trusted it. And so we continue softly from town to town. We pass stalls where bowls are stacked upside down for the night. We pass courtyards with sleeping animals. We pass watchfires that flicker low behind walls. Somewhere in a room lit by oil, a ledger is being closed. Somewhere else, a traveler is making plans for dawn, checking the direction of the next leg, asking how long the well takes to reach. The next day will come, but for now the night holds everything gently in place. If you listen closely in imagination, the Silk Road at night has a very particular sound. Not loud, not grand, but layered. A loose strap tapping softly. A distant call from a gate. A pan being set down near embers. The small cough of a tired worker. The hush of a passing breeze over sand. These are the sounds of movement becoming rest. And perhaps that is where we will leave ourselves for a little while, not at the end of the road, but in the middle of its calm, where lamps are still burning in a market lane, where caravans are settling into the dark, and where the great ancient network of roads continues outward beyond the last visible fire. The world is wide, but tonight it can feel simple enough to hold in the mind as a line of lights, a line of steps, a line of patient travelers moving under the stars. So let the road lengthen and soften and blur at the edges. Let the camels kneel and rest. Let the merchants finish their counting. Let the city gates stand quietly against the night. And as the desert air cools and the lamps grow small, we can slowly follow the hush that comes after travel, the hush that comes after labor, the hush that comes after a long and careful journey. The Silk Road at night becomes less a place of distance and more a place of connection, and in that connection there is room to breathe, room to drift, and room to rest. The moon rises a little higher now over the eastern edge of the plain, and the old roads, though unseen by most eyes, remain there beneath it. They are patient roads, remembered by dust, by stone, by the soft memory of hooves and footsteps. They have carried emperors and envoys, monks and merchants, cooks and craftsmen, children and guides, and many who left no names behind. Yet all of them, in one way or another, helped make the world larger and more familiar at the same time. In a final quiet thought for tonight, imagine a traveler seated at the threshold of an inn, holding a cup between both hands. The fire is low. The animals are stabled. The market is quieting. Somewhere beyond the walls, the desert continues under the stars. And here, for this moment, nothing more is required. The road has done what roads do. It has brought the night safely to a place where it can rest. For a long time, people would have understood the Silk Road not as one road, but as many overlapping paths, each with its own customs, dangers, and rhythms. Some routes crossed open desert, where the horizon seemed almost unbroken and the sky felt close enough to touch. Others threaded through mountain passes, where the air was thinner and the stones held the day's warmth only briefly before releasing it into the night. Some lines of travel followed river valleys, where reeds bent in the wind and irrigation channels carried life through dry country. In every case, the journey was shaped by the land first. Human intention came after. The road had to be negotiated with cliffs, sands, snow, weather, and the distance between wells. That is part of what makes the Silk Road such a quiet marvel. It was not built like a single grand monument, with one moment of completion and one visible outline. It grew the way a long memory grows by repeated use. A track became familiar because someone found a safer crossing. A stopping place became a town because many travelers learned it was wise to sleep there. A town became famous because its water was dependable, or its inns were clean, or its markets were well supplied, or its rulers were stable enough to make strangers feel less afraid. History often seems to admire the dramatic event, but here, as so often, the patient thing mattered most. The dependable well, the accepted measure, the open gate. The road that someone chose to maintain because it would serve many others after them. At night, those choices become invisible. The stones in a courtyard no longer know how many sandals passed over them. The wooden beams of a caravanserai no longer remember every hanging lantern. Yet if we imagine the Silk Road in its full breadth, we can still sense the accumulated care that made movement possible. A merchant arriving in a new city might not have known the name of the person who repaired the bridge ahead of him, or the person who stocked the barley in the inn, or the clerk who kept the records that allowed goods to move from one district to another. But all of that care, seen and unseen, stood behind a single night's shelter. There is something especially calming in the way ancient trade depended on ordinary administrative work. We tend to imagine history in terms of heroes and conquerors, but the Silk Road also depended on people who weighed, wrote, counted, taxed, inspected, and stored. Clay seals pressed into bundles, ink notes on ledgers, standardized measures repeated until they became trusted. The world of trade needed the quiet discipline of accuracy. A sack of pepper had to be the expected amount. A bolt of cloth had to match its description. A caravan leaving one kingdom and entering another needed documents, permissions, and the reassurance that its cargo would be recognized. Even in a landscape of dust and wind, there was a hidden order. That order often lived in the spaces between the grand centers that history remembers. Between Chang'an and Samarkand, between Merv and Nishapur, between Kashgar and Dunhuang, between Antioch and the ports of the eastern Mediterranean, there were countless smaller settlements, way stations, and frontier towns. Some were prosperous enough to leave behind fine architecture. Others survived mostly in fragments. A ruined wall, a few pottery shards, a well shaft, a scatter of coins, the outline of a room once warmed by a brazier. Archaeology can be like listening to a story told in half voices. It rarely gives everything, but it gives enough to suggest a larger life. And the larger life was varied. A caravan might carry silk, yes, but also amber, glass, ceramics, spices, metals, medicines, paper, dyes, wine, incense, horses, dates, walnuts, and ideas that could travel without needing a chest or a pack animal at all. Along with goods moved stories about gods, methods of writing, techniques of farming, and ways of building. A religion could move eastward along the same channels that carried cloth. A new style of painting could arrive in a monastery or a palace. A recipe could be adapted to local grains and local tastes. A word could cross a frontier and change its pronunciation several times before becoming part of another language. The road was never only a market. It was a corridor of exchange in the broadest sense. Sometimes the exchanges were gentle and cumulative. A technique for making paper once learned could slowly transform administration, literature, and education. A more efficient saddle could change the long-distance use of animals. Better knowledge of irrigation could help an oasis flourish for generations. But sometimes the exchanges were fragile. A single closure of a route, a local war, a shift in climate, or the rise and fall of a dynasty could redirect travel for decades. The Silk Road was not a fixed certainty. It was a living network, and living networks can be interrupted. This makes its history feel both grand and vulnerable. The same roads that connected empires could also disappear into sand, be bypassed, or lose importance when maritime routes became more efficient for some kinds of trade. Still, for many centuries, the overland routes mattered deeply. One reason is that the land itself created natural nodes of concentration. In a vast dry region, water defined settlement. A city with reliable springs or a river crossing becomes a necessary place. And where necessities gather, people gather. That is how a market can grow from something practical into something almost ceremonial. A market is not only exchange, it is recognition. It says that many distant lives have all arrived at the same point for a while. It holds together different languages, different clothes, different weights and measures, different smells of food and leather and dust. By day, such a place could be lively and bright. By night, it settled into a stillness full of lingering traces. Crushed herbs underfoot, empty baskets, the last scent of bread, a few sleeping dogs, a lantern left burning outside a stall. The desert markets themselves were often only one part of a longer chain. Goods might be brought from a farm, a mine, a forest, a workshop, or a seaport, and then passed on through a sequence of middlemen, each taking a small part of the value and carrying the item farther. This layering of commerce is easy to overlook, but it is one of the great features of the Silk Road. Very few objects traveled alone. A silk cloth in one city might have passed through several hands, each with different skills and knowledge. Someone knew how to store it safely. Someone knew how to bundle it so it would not tear. Someone understood the tastes of a distant court. Someone knew which official expected a gift and which trader preferred coin. In that sense, the Silk Road was also a chain of expertise. Knowledge mattered almost as much as cargo. Experienced caravan leaders could read the sky, the shape of dunes, the strength of wind, the timing of seasonal crossings, and the places where a storm might settle unexpectedly over a pass. They knew which towns were generous and which were strict, which rulers were newly secure, which roads had become unsafe, and which inns were reliable enough for a long stop. They knew, too, the small social rules that made travel possible, who should be greeted first, which local customs to respect, what gifts to offer, how to speak through an interpreter without losing patience. Much of this was not written in famous books, but it was carried in memory and repeated through generations. The silent archive of practical wisdom is one of the oldest archives in the world. There is a kind of peace in imagining those habits. A traveler tying a scarf more tightly against the dust. A guide checking the stars before sleep. A stableman brushing down a pack animal with steady strokes. A cook stirring a pot in a courtyard where the fire has only coals left. All of them are small scenes, but together they reveal the human scale of a vast system. The Silk Road can seem immense when viewed on a map, stretching across regions and centuries, yet each part of it was made of ordinary bodies needing water, shade, food, rest, and safety. The grand geography began as daily necessity. The cities along the route often became famous because they could offer that necessity in abundance. A city like Samarkand, for instance, could be remembered for its position, its architecture, its artisans, and its cosmopolitan character. Over time, such cities gathered layers of history. A temple from one era might stand near a mosque from another. A workshop might occupy a building whose foundations belonged to an older kingdom. Street names could change while the shape of the lanes remained. In some places, the archaeology of the city tells us that one civilization did not simply replace another. Instead, the new often rose amid the old, adapting, rebuilding, reusing stones, and carrying forward older habits in altered forms. Cities are among the most patient creators of continuity, and yet they are also vulnerable. Earthquakes, invasions, floods, fires, and shifting trade patterns could alter a city's fortune. A proud center of commerce could become quieter within a generation. A neighborhood full of merchants might be reduced to walls and buried courtyards. Time does not erase everything at once, it rearranges. One era's lively bazaar becomes another era's excavation trench. A fountain once used by travelers becomes a fragment of carved stone under the sun. This transformation can feel melancholy, but it is also strangely consoling. Cities, like people, are not fixed. They live many lives. They can be prosperous, neglected, renewed, and remembered. Among the most haunting parts of Silk Road history are the places where the roads have disappeared, leaving only traces. There are abandoned settlements on the edges of deserts where the roofs have collapsed, and the air has become so dry that some materials survive with remarkable delicacy. A woven item, a wooden object, a manuscript, a painted fragment of a wall, a shoe, a comb, a child's toy, a seal, a letter written in a hurried hand, all of these can emerge from the ground after centuries, and each one carries a tiny portion of an unknown life. It is impossible not to feel a kind of tenderness towards such survivals. They remind us that history is full of unrecorded evenings. Someone once sat there, perhaps very much as you might now, simply waiting for the day to be over. A manuscript found in a desert cave or a ruined room can be especially moving because it preserves thought in a still state. The inked lines might be religious, commercial, poetic, or administrative. They might list goods, invoke blessings, or copy a text meant for meditation. Whatever their purpose, they show that the Silk Road was also a route for written culture. Monasteries and libraries along the routes preserved texts in multiple languages, and the movement of manuscripts helped shape the intellectual life of entire regions. Some writings were carried because they were sacred, others because they were useful. Some because someone hoped to earn a living as a scribe, teacher, or translator. The quiet persistence of writing is one of the road's most enduring legacies. Languages themselves became travelers. On the Silk Road, people often lived among many tongues. A trader might know one language at home, another in the marketplace, and a third for dealing with officials. Terms for goods, weights, professions, and religious concepts could pass from language to language, changing shape as they went. This makes the road feel almost like a living reed instrument with many notes sounding together. It also suggests that communication was never perfect, but often sufficient. A gesture, a sample, a shared number, a sealed document, a familiar image on a coin, a translated phrase, a trusted intermediary. These were enough again and again to bridge distance. Coins are especially interesting because they are so small and so durable. They can pass through many hands, cross many borders, and outlive the people who used them. On ancient trade routes, coins were more than money. They were portable evidence of authority. A ruler's face or symbol might be carried far from the capital, entering a market where the ruler was only a distant name. A coin could be clipped, worn smooth, hoarded, melted, buried, or lost in a crack in the floor. Centuries later, it might be found by a careful excavator and identify a contact between places that never met in person but were connected through trade. In this way, even a single coin can hold a quiet geography. The same is true of ceramics. Pottery shards found along route sites can reveal where vessels were made, how they were decorated, what they were used for, and where they traveled. A bowl found in one oasis might have been produced hundreds of miles away. Its shape could reflect one tradition, while its glaze reflects another. These small objects tell a story of adaptation and taste. People did not merely exchange useful things. They also appreciated styles, colors, and craftsmanship. A carved cup, a patterned textile, a finely shaped jar, a metal buckle with elegant lines. Such items reveal the subtle pleasures that existed even amid hard travel. Commerce was practical, but it was not without beauty. Beauty mattered to the road in more ways than one. For people passing through difficult lands, an oasis could feel beautiful because it promised water. A tree line could feel beautiful because it promised shade. A domed roof at the end of a long approach could feel beautiful because it promised shelter. In that sense, the Silk Road was full of small beauties rooted in relief. A traveler might not need a palace to feel wonder. A clean basin of water after hours of dust could be enough. A pile of apricots in a market could be enough. A patch of blue tile seen through a gate could be enough. The road taught people to notice what sustains them. There were also artistic traditions that flourished because of contact. Motifs could travel across regions, appearing in different materials and contexts. A vine pattern might be seen on stone, cloth, metal, or wall painting. Animal forms could take on local meanings as they were reimagined in new cultures. Religious imagery sometimes blended influences from many directions. This is one of the Silk Road's deepest truths. Interaction does not always produce sameness. Often it produces layered originality. A form borrowed from afar becomes something newly local. A style of dress, a method of painting, a shape of arch, a way of binding a book, all can be transformed by the hands that receive them. If we imagine the road in winter, the mood shifts. The mountain passes become more severe. The wind sounds sharper. Camels and horses breathe vapor into the cold. Wool and felt become especially important. Travelers would have needed thick garments, reliable tents, and careful planning. In some places, the same routes that felt manageable in one season became dangerous in another. Snow could hide a path, ice could make a crossing treacherous. In this season, every bit of foresight mattered. It is easy to see why travelers valued local knowledge. A guide who knew where the snowdrifts gathered or where the stream froze first could be the difference between delay and disaster. The road was not only a matter of distance, it was a matter of timing. Time was one of the great quiet powers of the Silk Road. Caravans traveled by the rhythm of days, seasons, and political eras. Goods, too, had their own timing. Some could only move when weather allowed. Some were best sold before a festival. Some were valuable because they arrived in time for a court event or a diplomatic exchange. Even the movement of ideas had timing. A religion might spread in one century, while another faith or text became prominent in the next. Dynasties rose and fell, roads shifted, and priorities changed. Yet the old routes left traces that later generations could rediscover, reuse, or reinterpret. The road lived on in memory as much as in travel. That memory was often preserved by the people who depended on the road most. Merchants' families passed down experience. Guides taught routes to younger relatives. Artisans learned what distant customers preferred. Religious communities remembered where shrines, temples, or monasteries could be found. Diplomats and envoys carried diplomatic customs from court to court. Even ordinary households in caravan towns accumulated a kind of geographic intelligence. They knew when the big trading season began, which animals were passing through, which accents were arriving, and what sorts of goods would appear in the market after a successful crossing. In a place shaped by travel, everyone became a little more alert to the world beyond the horizon. And perhaps that is why Silk Road history feels so intimate, even when it is vast. It is full of the human desire to know what lies beyond the next ridge, while also wanting a safe bed to return to at night. It is full of movement, but also of the longing for stable ground. It is full of unfamiliar faces, yet built on repeated acts of hospitality. A host offering water, a clerk stamping a permit, a cook preparing a meal for strangers, a guard opening a gate at dusk, a merchant sharing news from a distant city. These gestures may seem modest, but they gave the road its character. Civilization in this setting was not only measured by palaces and battles, it was also measured by whether a traveler could rest. One of the most persistent images of the Silk Road is the caravanserai, the roadside inn or fortified stopping place where travelers and animals could spend the night. These structures were often simple in purpose but profound in effect. They created a pause in the journey. Thick walls sheltered the courtyard. Gates could be closed. Water, fodder, and sleeping space might be available. In the evening, the place would fill with a kind of layered quiet. Low conversation, the clink of containers, the rustle of blankets, the occasional sound of an animal shifting in its stall. In the morning, the same place would change almost instantly into a scene of departure. Pack saddles tightened, bundles lifted, names exchanged, blessings spoken. Then the gate would open again and the road would continue. A caravanserai could also be a meeting point of worlds. A person from one end of the route might share a bench with another from far beyond any shared homeland. They might not speak much, but they might compare the weather, the road conditions, the price of grain, the quality of water, or the reliability of a local official. Small exchanges like these helped sustain a wider knowledge network. In an age before rapid communication, travel itself was a form of information delivery. A caravan carried goods, but it also carried rumor, news, and expectation. In that sense, the road was one of the great instruments by which the ancient world became interconnected. Some of the most fascinating Silk Road stories involve not only merchants but pilgrims and monks. Religious travel gives the road a different kind of stillness. A pilgrim is often moving with intention shaped by devotion, study, or discipline. Their pace may be slower, more contemplative. They may visit shrines, copy texts, seek teachers, or return home with sacred objects and new understanding. Along these routes, monasteries became places of refuge, scholarship, and preservation. Some housed travelers, some copied manuscripts, some offered rituals of blessing before the next stage of the journey. The religious dimensions of the Silk Road remind us that people crossed vast distances not only for profit, but also for meaning. Meaning can be difficult to see on a map, but the Silk Road was full of it. A traveler might interpret a difficult crossing as a test, a favor, a warning, or simply a fact of life. A city gate could symbolize arrival, welcome, taxation, or protection, depending on who stood before it. A mountain pass might be feared as dangerous and revered as beautiful. A ruined site might be left behind by one generation and remembered by another as a sacred place, a lost kingdom, or a once great station on an ancient route. The road did not have only one story. It accumulated many layers of significance as the centuries passed. There are still long stretches of the old routes where the landscape itself seems to keep the memory. A line of distant hills, a dry plain with a faint trace of an older embankment, a cluster of ruins near a stream, a solitary tower against the sky, a weathered gate leading nowhere obvious. These places invite patience. They do not tell their stories all at once. They ask to be observed quietly. If the mind lingers, one can almost imagine the old emotion still there beneath the silence. A shadow of a caravan, the pause before entry, the turning of a camel's head, the lantern bobbing in the dark. The Silk Road also changed the foods people ate. Along the route, ingredients crossed regions and adapted to local customs. New fruits, nuts, spices, grains, and methods of preparation enriched local diets. Some foods were valued for travel because they dried well, stored well, or provided steady energy. Flatbreads, nuts, dried apricots, raisins, cured meats, cheeses, and hard sweets could sustain long days on the road. Tea in later periods became another important companion for travel and hospitality. The culinary world of the Silk Road was practical, but also comforting. To eat on the road is to feel for a moment that the body is safe enough to continue. A great many of the people who made this world function never appear in the famous chronicles. The camels had drivers, the inns had cooks, the markets had porters, the wells had keepers, the bridges had builders, the paperwork had clerks, the roads had maintainers. Even the animals themselves formed part of the human economy in a way that feels almost reciprocal. Camels could endure conditions that would challenge other animals. Horses were prized for speed and endurance, especially in some regions where state power depended on cavalry and messenger networks. Donkeys and mules served quieter but indispensable roles. The long history of the Silk Road is inseparable from the long history of domesticated animals and the trust people placed in them. That trust is easy to overlook when we think about ancient transportation, yet it was essential. A caravan journey required confidence in many things that could not be fully controlled. Confidence in weather, confidence in local authorities, confidence in guides, confidence in the integrity of companions, confidence in one's own preparation. Trust did not mean certainty. It meant a willingness to proceed under conditions of partial knowledge. In many ways, that is the deepest human condition. The Silk Road simply made it visible. Every departure was an act of faith in the next oasis, the next town, the next morning. There is also something quietly moving about how often the road brought together the temporary and the enduring. temporary camps, enduring routes, temporary markets, enduring cities, temporary conversation, enduring exchange, temporary hardship, enduring memory. A traveler might stay only one night, but the inn they used might stand for generations. A trade item might be sold in a day, but the route it took might continue for centuries. A rumor could pass in an afternoon, while a story about a distant kingdom could survive for ages. The Silk Road is full of such asymmetries. Time moves at different speeds within the same system. Some legends attach themselves to the road because it was so full of unknowns. People imagined remote kingdoms with extraordinary wealth, hidden rivers, lost palaces, sacred relics, and wise rulers in far-off lands. A road that connected so many worlds naturally invited stories beyond simple fact. Myth often appears where knowledge is incomplete, and on the Silk Road there were always gaps. Some mountain regions were remote and difficult to survey. Some desert stretches swallowed tracks. Some cities existed in more than one form across different eras, making later memories unstable. In such places, legend grew easily. Yet legend was not merely falsehood. It was also a way of respecting distance, acknowledging that the unknown had a presence. The imagery of distant kingdoms is especially powerful in Silk Road literature and imagination. One can think of hidden oases where palaces once shone, or borderlands where languages blurred like colors in water, or walled towns where merchants from many climates slept under one roof. These images are not always precise in the historical sense, but they preserve a deeper truth. The road was a place where the world seemed larger than any single homeland. People who traveled it often returned changed, not only by what they carried, but by what they had seen. A new architecture, a new prayer, a new type of paper, a new way of arranging a garden, a new taste in music or story. These could all become part of a life after travel. Music itself may have traveled along these routes in forms we can only partly reconstruct. Instruments moved, tuning systems shifted, and melodies encountered other melodies. Courts and city homes alike could enjoy performances that reflected multiple influences. A stringed instrument might take on a new shape as it crossed regions. A percussion pattern might be adapted to local ceremonial use. Music, like trade, creates bridges that do not need to be visible. A listener hears before they understand. In a caravan town at night, one might imagine a soft instrument played for a small gathering, not loudly, but enough to mark the pause between one day and the next. That sound would have belonged to the road as surely as the creak of wheels. The Silk Road's history also reminds us that empires did not simply command trade. They depended on it, feared its disruptions, and tried to regulate it. Control over routes could bring wealth and prestige. Fortified border posts, taxation systems, safe conduct agreements, and diplomatic missions all reflected this. Yet the road often resisted total control because geography itself remained partly in charge. A state might dominate a city, but not the weather across the entire span. A ruler might fortify a pass, but not eliminate every alternative trail. Merchants were often pragmatic. If one route became too costly or dangerous, they would look for another. The road, therefore, was flexible in a way empires often were not. This flexibility helped preserve continuity through political change. A kingdom could fall and the route might survive. A dynasty could rise and the road might be taxed differently. A border could move and the same market town might find itself on a new edge of the world. Yet the basic desire to connect remained. People always needed to bring goods from where they were made to where they were wanted. They needed to move envoys, letters, luxuries, medicines, and skilled labor. They needed paths through the difficult middle. The Silk Road was that middle, and for centuries it remained one of the most important spaces on Earth. If one listens to the long silence of its ruins, it is possible to feel less the scale of conquest than the scale of endurance. Ruins do not merely testify to endings, they testify to having once been useful. A wall was built to hold something. A courtyard was designed to receive someone. A canal was dug to guide water, a tower was raised to watch, a tomb was made to remember. Even an abandoned roadbed is a sign of former purpose. There is reassurance in that. Nothing was built for nothing. Every structure served a life. Even if we cannot name the life now, it was there. And perhaps that is one of the loveliest aspects of thinking about the Silk Road at night. It encourages humility. It is impossible to understand everything, and so the mind becomes softer. We learn to accept incomplete maps, partial histories, and quiet fragments. We learn that the past is not a single story, but a field of overlapping journeys. We learn that people can live meaningful lives in places now reduced to dust. We learn that a single road can contain many civilizations, many faiths, many languages, many ordinary acts of care. The night makes room for this kind of understanding. It does not demand a full answer. It allows for a patient one. So in the dark, imagine once more the caravan moving slowly under a wide sky. The stars are scattered like faraway lamps, steady and indifferent and beautiful. The camels step with a rhythm that seems older than memory. The driver knows the route by habits of the land and by habits of the heart. Ahead, somewhere beyond the low rise, there is shelter. Perhaps a city wall, perhaps a caravanserai, perhaps a small village with a well, perhaps only a safe place to stop and wait for dawn. That is enough for now. The road continues, but it does so quietly. Its great distances are made of small intervals. Its great history is made of repeated pauses. Its great wealth is made of many hands passing objects onward. Its great mystery is made of all that cannot be fully recovered. And yet, even in what remains unknown, there is comfort. The unknown in this case is not empty. It is full of former lives, lost voices, and careful footsteps. It is full of lamps that once burned in windows and have long since gone dark. It is full of bargains made by moonlight, prayers whispered before departure, and children falling asleep while their elders talked of the next town. The Silk Road at night is, in the end, not only a record of exchange but a meditation on connection. Between distant places, between strangers, between past and present, between motion and rest. A road like this does not ask to be rushed. It asks to be remembered slowly. So let the memory of it drift a little now, like smoke rising from a low fire and thinning into the sky. Let the markets quiet. Let the gates close. Let the caravans settle. Let the old cities keep their secrets without strain. And let the patient road, stretching through desert, mountain, and oasis, remain just visible in the mind as a line of trust across the dark. Beyond that line of trust, if the mind is willing to wander a little farther, the Silk Road begins to appear not as one road at all, but as a soft web of routes, some ancient and formal, some improvised, some only temporarily important before wind or war or politics altered the shape of travel. It is almost never a single straight ribbon. It is more like a family of paths, each one joined to the others by necessity. One branch might follow a river valley where reeds grew tall in the damp air. Another might edge the foot of a mountain range where winter snow made the passes narrow and bright. Another might cut across a plain so broad that distance seemed to dissolve into sky. Merchants learned these variations with the patience of gardeners learning soil. They knew where water gathered, where horses could rest, where salt crusted the earth, where a town had sprung up around a shrine or a ford or a market that met only once a month beneath awnings of woven cloth. In this way, the Silk Road belonged not only to great empires, but to small places too. A humble roadside well could matter as much in the moment as a famous capital. A patch of shade under an apricot tree could be remembered for years by a trader who had crossed a dry stretch with aching legs and a dust-gritted mouth. The landscape was not abstract to the people moving through it. It was intimate. Every rise and depression, every seasonal stream, every change in wind could alter the day. In a world without modern engines, the earth itself was a partner in travel, sometimes generous and sometimes severe. To journey at all was to enter into a practical conversation with weather and terrain. There is something peaceful in imagining how deeply people knew these routes by repeated use. Not in the measured way a modern map app might know them, but in the bodily way one remembers a staircase or a favorite path through a garden. A caravan master might know that after 2 hours there would be a place where the ground felt softer beneath the hooves. A muleteer might know that certain stones rang differently underfoot. A guide might remember where snowmelt gathered into a hidden trickle, or where the sun struck the canyon wall first in the morning. These details do not often appear in grand histories, but they are what made travel possible. The world was carried forward by such exact, quiet knowledge. The cities along the Silk Road, too, were built from layers of practical wisdom. Some were famous for their walls, some for their workshops, some for their gardens, some for their libraries, some for the mingling of tongues in their streets. A city at a crossroads had to think about more than defense. It had to think about storage, sanitation, hospitality, taxes, and the steady movement of goods through crowded gates. It had to provide water for people and animals. It had to make room for strangers while preserving order. These were delicate tasks, and the best cities did them with an almost invisible grace. From a distance, the traveller saw only towers, domes, and banners. Up close, there were cisterns, bathhouses, stable yards, granaries, and courtyards where news from far away could settle into local life. Some of the most enduring Silk Road cities were also places where the sacred and the practical lived beside one another in an unhurried balance. Temples, mosques, monasteries, and shrines often stood near workshops and bazaars. A pilgrim might pause to pray before buying almonds. A merchant might make an offering before tallying weights. A scribe might copy a legal document in a room adjacent to a place of devotion. Faith and trade were not always separate in these environments. Both were ways of trusting that the world had patterns, that distant acts could matter locally, and that a human being was never entirely alone in the larger order of things. The Silk Road also carried stories, and stories travelled more lightly than silk. They slipped between languages with little resistance. They learned to wear new clothes. A tale born in one city could be retold by a fire thousands of miles away and still retain its essential shape. Or perhaps it would change, just enough to suit a new audience, and in changing it would become both older and newer at once. This is one of the deepest mysteries of cultural history. A legend is not weakened by being shared. Often it becomes stronger, more durable, more adaptable. It is like a travelling bowl repaired with lacquer. Each repair is visible, and each repair is also a sign of continued use. Along the Silk Road, myths and beliefs moved with traders, monks, diplomats, and wandering performers. Some tales spoke of heavenly mountains, some of hidden paradises, some of precious birds, some of dragons, some of kings who tested strangers by disguise, some of cities blessed by supernatural rivers or cursed by vanity. In one region, a story might be told as sacred history, in another as entertainment, in another as a warning. Yet certain images repeated themselves with curious persistence. The mountain that separates worlds, the oasis that appears like mercy. The merchant who is wise because he listens more than he speaks. The princess who is given as part of a diplomatic marriage and carries with her a new set of poems, recipes, garments, and ritual customs. The relic or artifact that passes through many hands and slowly gathers a halo of meaning. Such objects were not merely possessions, they were witnesses. It is easy, from a great distance, to imagine the Silk Road as a route of polished treasures. But much of what moved across it was ordinary and necessary. Grain, paper, salt, leather, iron tools, medicines made from roots and bark, saffron and walnuts, horses and camels, wool and linen, dried fruit, ceramic bowls, timber in regions where trees were scarce, horseshoes, needles, saddles, and ropes. Each object solved a problem somewhere else. The world was knitted together by usefulness before it was ever romanticized by later memory. Luxury goods did travel, yes, and they tended to survive in chronicles because they were splendid. But the quieter cargoes mattered too. A shipment of paper could change administration. A new method of glazing pottery could alter local craft for generations. A medicinal recipe might ease a fever. A practical object can have a historical life as consequential as any jewel. Paper itself is one of the gentler revolutions in human history. It does not announce itself with the force of battle, but it changes the possibilities of thought. Once paper moved westward across Asia, and once scribes and artisans learned to make it in new places, writing became more affordable and more abundant. Contracts, letters, poems, prayers, inventories, school exercises, receipts, and administrative records all had a better chance of surviving or being copied. The Silk Road did not just carry goods across deserts. It carried methods of remembering. It made memory less fragile in some places and more portable in others. A page can cross a border more easily than a stone tablet. A line of ink can travel farther than a palace. And yet, even with paper, much has been lost. Time consumes libraries as surely as drought consumes orchards. Fires, floods, invasions, neglect, and simple decay have erased countless records. This is why the surviving pieces feel so luminous. A letter found in a dry cave, folded and tucked away, can open an entire human world. One can imagine the hand that wrote it, perhaps with some hesitation, perhaps with a familiar confidence. One can imagine the recipient, perhaps never reached, or perhaps reached long ago and now forgotten. A tax record can reveal the existence of a workshop. A fragment of embroidery can reveal taste, skill, and trade connections. A few lines in a foreign language can show that someone somewhere had learned enough to speak to a stranger. The Silk Road lives in such fragments. There are places along these routes where the silence is especially deep. Old caravanserais in ruined states can seem like shells of listening. Their walls still enclose an empty center where travelers once slept, ate, stabled animals, and exchanged information. Such buildings were practical miracles. They offered security in a dangerous or uncertain region. They created a temporary community of people who might have nothing in common except the road itself. Within those walls, a man from one language group could hear a song from another. A woman traveling with spices might learn news about an election, a border conflict, or a distant crop failure. A child might see a stranger's hat, knife, or prayer beads and remember it forever. The caravanserai was a pause made architectural. It said, in effect, "You may rest here for the night, and the world will continue tomorrow." One can picture the evening at such a place without strain. The animals first, settling with a sigh and a shuffle of hooves. Then the bundles unloaded carefully because a badly tied knot can become a small disaster in the dark. Cloaks spread out, water brought in a shared vessel, bread broken. Soup warmed in a blackened pot, the air carrying a mixture of wool, dust, leather, smoke, and whatever spice happened to have leaked from a sack. Conversation would be low, practical, and often polite. Travelers tend to become modest in the presence of uncertainty. They speak in ways that leave room for the road ahead. A story might be told, not to impress but to ease the evening. Someone might mention a bridge farther east, recently repaired. Someone else might warn of a rumor that bandits were active in a narrow pass. Another person might describe a market where dyed cloth was selling well. Such knowledge passed from mouth to mouth, accumulating like deposits of silt. It is easy to think of bandits as the main threat to caravans, and certainly they were one of the dangers. But the road was not only dangerous in dramatic ways. More often it was dangerous through exhaustion, weather, drought, illness, and miscalculation. A wheel could break. A pack animal could stumble. A guide could be overconfident. A storm could obscure a landmark. A river could swell unexpectedly. A supply of grain could be too light for the next segment. These risks were never far away. The romance of the Silk Road often smooths them out, but the people who lived it understood that endurance was more important than glamour. They respected distance because distance had consequences. Some caravans were small, almost intimate. Others extended for miles, a line of moving patience. The larger ones required organization that was surprisingly precise. Animals had to be arranged by burden and temperament. Drivers had to know who was responsible for which group. Payments, permits, taxes, and local customs all had to be respected. The leader needed not only authority but memory. He had to know where the next water source lay, which settlement was reliable, which official expected a gift, which road would be impassable after rain, and which merchant in a particular town was known to honor a bargain. In this sense, caravan leadership was a kind of mobile diplomacy. A successful journey depended on the ability to maintain relationships across space. The diplomacy of the Silk Road was not always grand or formal. It could be as small as a bowl of tea accepted with both hands. It could be a shared idiom, a translation offered with care, a pause before speaking in the presence of an elder, a decision to remove one's shoes before entering a sacred space. These gestures, slight as they seem, allowed strangers to continue as strangers without becoming enemies. They reduced friction. They gave shape to coexistence. Many empires rose on the Silk Road and many fell, but these daily acts of respect often outlasted them because they were repeated by ordinary people rather than decreed from above. The climate itself played a large role in shaping these routes. In the heat of some deserts, travel was best done with the coolness of dawn. The world could seem silver then, the air still holding night's memory. By midday, the sand and stone would begin to radiate warmth back into the body. In winter, mountain routes demanded a different discipline. Snow could bury markers and narrow passes to impossible thinness. Spring brought meltwater and fragile green. Autumn could be perfect, crisp and generous, a season when the land seemed to hold its breath and allow passage. Many routes were therefore seasonal in practice, if not in theory. History often imagines roads as fixed lines, but the lived experience of a road is always temporary. It exists in relation to weather, maintenance, and use. There were also soundscapes along the route that a modern city dweller might not easily imagine. The creak of leather straps, the soft impact of hooves on packed earth, the clink of metal fittings, the murmur of many languages in a market, the rush of water through an irrigation channel, the flutter of cloth in a dry wind. At night, the quieter sounds became more noticeable. Coughing, the turning of a body on a mat, the low complaint of an animal, the crackle of a small fire, the distant barking of a dog, the sudden hush after a story ended. A traveller lying awake would not hear nothing. They would hear the world at rest, which is a different and often more intimate kind of music. In some places, astronomy and navigation were closely linked to travel. The stars were not merely beautiful, they were practical companions. A caravan moving under a clear sky might use constellations to keep its bearings, or at least to confirm direction in the absence of obvious landmarks. The moon could illuminate a route just enough to make the night possible. The planets, wandering in their own slow courses, may have seemed to mirror the journeys of people below. This is another reason the Silk Road has such an enduring hold on the imagination. It was a place where the heavens and the earth seemed to converse. Human movement beneath vast celestial movement invites reflection. One cannot help feeling small, but not erased. The great religions associated with the Silk Road each brought their own forms of rest, text, and pilgrimage. Buddhism traveled widely and adapted in many regions, producing monasteries, cave sanctuaries, translated scriptures, and exquisite art. Christian communities of various traditions appeared in some cities and maintained ties across great distances. Islam spread with astonishing breadth and also local variety, shaping scholarship, law, architecture, and devotion. Zoroastrian, Jewish, Manichaean, and local indigenous traditions all found places in the broader mosaic at different times and locations. The road was never spiritually uniform. It was a corridor of plural lives. In one town, a bell might sound. In another, a call to prayer. In another, monks might chant in a cool stone chamber while a merchant outside bargained over pepper or silk thread. Such diversity did not mean perfect peace, of course. There were periods of tension, persecution, conversion by force, suspicion, and state control. History never becomes gentle merely because it is ancient, but even in troubled eras, the Silk Road often remained a zone where difference had to be managed rather than denied. That requirement itself left traces. It encouraged translation, bilingualism, hybrid art, composite cuisine, and legal flexibility. When people must live near difference, they often discover how to make difference into routine. This is a quiet achievement, not always celebrated, but deeply important. It is one of the reasons trade routes can matter beyond commerce. They teach societies how to encounter the unfamiliar without immediately destroying it. The food of the Silk Road deserves a moment of unhurried attention because food is one of the clearest markers of exchange. A dish is often a map you can taste. Spices from the Indian subcontinent, fruits from Central Asian orchards, noodles from one region, flatbreads from another, rice in some climates, millet in others, lamb and yogurt, cucumbers, onions, sesame, honey, dried apricots, pistachios, fennel, cumin, coriander. Recipes moved with women and men, with soldiers and diplomats, with cooks in elite households, and with laborers who adapted whatever was available. A city could be recognized by its bread, its tea, its stew, its sweets, the cut of its noodles, the way its dumplings were folded, or the season in which it served certain fruits. Even now, many cuisines of Eurasia carry quiet reminders of this long conversation. Tea, too, has its own meditative history. Not all tea routes were identical to Silk Road routes, but they were related in the broad world of exchange across Asia. Tea's warmth suited travel and conversation. It invited pauses. A cup offered in a market or inn could make the air feel more human. One can imagine merchants discussing weight and quality while steam rises from small bowls. One can imagine a winter stop where tea is precious because it restores attention. The act of drinking something hot in a cold place, or something lightly bitter in a tired afternoon, feels almost like an agreement with the body. Such ordinary comforts were essential to long-distance life. The artisans of the Silk Road were among its least-sung heroes. We tend to remember emperors and explorers, but the makers of cloth, ceramics, metalwork, leather goods, and dyed paper shaped the visual and material language of the route. A single pattern on a textile could travel across frontiers and be copied in a new material. A style of glazed tile could move from one court to another. A metal cup engraved with vines or animals could carry aesthetic ideas farther than a diplomat might. Workshops were places of accumulated patience. Skills were handed down, adjusted, and specialized. An apprentice learned to recognize the right heat for clay or metal the way a musician learns pitch. These are quiet forms of inheritance. Some of the most haunting Silk Road survivals are textiles. Cloth is so vulnerable, and therefore so moving when it remains. A fragment can preserve color long after the garment has disappeared. A pattern can hint at trade with far-off regions. A woven border can indicate status, ritual use, or local fashion. One can imagine the hands that held a loom, the rhythm of the shuttle, the small corrections made by eye and memory. The cloth itself may have wrapped a child, adorned a noble, covered a saddle, or lined a burial chamber. It traveled through life into history with almost no insistence at all. Burial sites along the Silk Road often reveal how cosmopolitan some communities were. The dead were dressed, equipped, and placed in ways that reflected beliefs about the afterlife, ancestry, and social standing. Mummies from arid zones, for example, have sometimes preserved astonishing details of fabric, hairstyle, and even facial expression. In such remains, the distance between ancient people and ourselves can feel smaller than expected. A face wrapped in age may still seem to rest. A child's shoe can appear heartbreakingly immediate. A comb, a bead, a clasp, a woven basket, a wooden spoon, a pair of boots made for cold travel. These objects suggest not only social history but personal tenderness. Someone chose them, someone used them, someone cared. The archaeological record of the Silk Road is in some ways a record of chance. Dry air preserved what wet climates would have destroyed. Desert sands buried settlements and then protected them for centuries. Cave temples sealed away pigments and manuscripts. Abandoned cities remained half-hidden beneath dunes or silt. Modern discovery often depends on small moments: a crumbling wall, a local story, a worker's shovel striking an unusual surface, a scholar recognizing a script, a traveler noticing an outline in the earth. This gives the study of the Silk Road an almost dreamlike quality. It feels as if the land itself occasionally decides to return a fragment of memory. Not all at once, just enough to invite wonder. And wonder in this context is not separate from scholarship. It is one of the proper responses to evidence. To examine a trade bead, a seal, a manuscript, a bit of glass, or a painted mural is to enter a conversation across centuries. The object does not explain itself completely. It offers clues, and the historian responds with care. Who made this? For whom? By what route did it arrive here? What was the local language when it was first used? Was it cherished, repaired, inherited, or discarded? The answer may remain incomplete, but the questions themselves are a kind of respect. They acknowledge that the past was full of lives as complicated as our own. Some Silk Road cities became famous not only for commerce, but for intellectual life. Scholars gathered in observatories, libraries, courts, and religious institutions. Mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, translators, poets, and legal experts all contributed to a world in which knowledge traveled alongside merchandise. A traveler might carry a parcel of medicinal texts, or a copied table of stars, or a poem that would be memorized and recopied by students. The line between practical and poetic knowledge was not always sharp. Astronomy could guide prayer times and navigation. Medicine could rely on both observation and inherited theory. Poetry could preserve historical memory more faithfully than a dry record in some cases, because verse is easier to remember and recite. There is an especially lovely notion that some roads are not built only through landscape, but through language. When terms for goods, measurements, fibers, techniques, foods, and rituals spread between peoples, they create a shadow route of vocabulary. Words themselves become caravans. They arrive, settle, change, and sometimes keep traces of their original home. A borrowed word can be like a seed carried by wind. It may not look important at first, yet later it grows into common speech. Many of the oldest exchanges on the Silk Road survive in this way, not always in full sentences, but in names of spices, coins, fabrics, and places. The Silk Road at night, then, can be imagined as a conversation across many times at once. A messenger riding in the dark, a monk copying a text by lamp, a dyer stirring a vat while the city sleeps, a judge reviewing a contract brought by a trader who speaks with an accent shaped by mountains, a child hearing a bedtime tale about a far kingdom where the moon rises over white walls, a shepherd looking up from a hillside and noticing a line of lamps moving below, a mother stitching a torn sleeve so it will last another week. None of these acts are monumental by themselves. Together, they form the human scale of the route. Even the most famous empires associated with the Silk Road were, in the end, only temporary patterns on a longer field of movement. Empires taxed, protected, disrupted, standardized, and sometimes beautified the roads. They built watchtowers, repaired bridges, issued coinage, minted seals, and demanded tribute. They also collapsed, fragmented, and left behind local powers that continue the work of exchange in smaller ways. The road endured because the need for connection endured. That is perhaps the most enduring historical fact of all. Political order changes. Human dependence on one another remains. It is possible, in a quiet moment, to think of the Silk Road as a lesson in patience. Not the impatient patience of waiting for something specific, but the broader patience of civilizations learning one another slowly. This was never a clean process. It involved misunderstanding, bargaining, imitation, and selective adoption. A city might welcome one style of cloth and reject another custom. A dynasty might patronize foreign scholars while distrusting foreign merchants. A local potter might borrow a motif from a distant land and place it into a wholly new composition. Culture rarely travels intact. It breaks, adapts, and returns in altered shape. Yet that alteration is not corruption, it is life. The night makes all of this feel softer. During the day, history can seem competitive, filled with dates and borders and claims. At night, the same history becomes more like a sequence of lanterns seen from a distance. One does not need to identify every face to feel the continuity. One only needs to sense that people kept moving, kept building, kept writing, kept praying, kept trading, kept remembering. That continuity is enough to calm the mind. If you imagine the road now, let it be under a sky without urgency. Let the stars remain fixed long enough to be noticed. Let the animals breathe slowly. Let the city walls hold their quiet watch. Let the market awnings fold into darkness. Let the scribes lay down their brushes. Let the baker's oven cool. Let the wells glimmer in moonlight. Somewhere, a gate stands half open for someone expected in the morning. Somewhere, a bundle of letters waits in a saddlebag. Somewhere, a child who has never seen the ocean has just heard about it from a traveller with salt in his beard. Somewhere, a monastery bell or a temple drum or a muezzin's call or a household prayer marks the hour in a way that feels both local and part of a larger human rhythm. And as the road grows quieter still, it may be helpful to remember that many of the people who lived along it were not thinking about history at all. They were thinking about weather, bread, profit, family, health, debt, ceremony, harvest, and the next safe stop. They were protecting children, repairing gear, greeting guests, counting bolts of cloth, tying up parcels, settling disputes, making offerings, and sleeping when they could. History, which later seemed so large, was to them simply life. That thought is comforting. It restores scale. It reminds us that the past was inhabited by people who, like us, tried to get through their days with care. So let the silk, the dust, the horses, the stars, the stone gateways, the market spices, the old manuscripts, and the distant bells all drift together now into a softer and softer image. There is no need to force the road to end. Roads do not really end in the imagination. They fade, they divide, they disappear into hills or deserts or memories, and yet they remain discoverable by attention. The Silk Road remains such a discovery. It is a long memory of human connection, of patient exchange, of fragile things carried far. It is a reminder that even across immense distances, people have always found ways to meet. And now, as that meeting place of worlds slowly dims in the mind, let it do so without effort. Let the caravans come to rest. Let the city lights settle into the dark. Let the desert keep its cool silence. Let the old routes remain open only in dreams. There, in that dreaming silence, the road continues gently onward, and all its countless travelers move at last with perfect ease beneath a vast and kindly night. Beyond that kindly night, the imagination can linger a little longer, not because it must, but because there is something restful in following a road that has already gone quiet. The Silk Road was never one single line on a map. It was a living weave of tracks and passes, river crossings and caravanserais, mountain ledges and broad desert margins. It was many roads, many pauses, many small decisions made by people who understood that the world was large and that survival often depended on knowing where to stop. There were places where the road seemed to gather itself, like thread being drawn through a needle. A city set near a river bend or an oasis could become a resting place for merchants from many directions. In such a city, a traveller might hear several languages in one courtyard and smell the smoke of several kinds of cooking fires. A shopkeeper might keep accounts in one script while receiving coins stamped in another. A dyed cloth from one region could be admired by a woman from another, who would then carry it home as a wedding gift or a mark of status. A small object, easily overlooked, could travel farther than any person expected. A glass bead, a bronze mirror, a bolt of patterned silk, a fragment of parchment, a sack of pepper, a little jar of lapis pigment, a bundle of dried fruit. In this way, the road was built as much by modest things as by grand ones. It is easy to imagine the famous caravans with their camels moving in slow and measured rhythm, but the quieter truth is that transport was often intimate and practical. A caravan was a temporary community. It needed people who could read the sky, people who could mend harnesses, people who knew how to negotiate with local authorities, people who could locate water, and people who could keep watch through the long middle hours of the night. The animals themselves were part of the road's wisdom. Camels, especially, were not merely carriers but companions to the logic of the desert. Their ability to travel for long stretches with little water made them seem almost mythical to travelers from wetter lands. Yet even the camel was not invulnerable. It needed care, rest, fodder, and patient handling. The desert rewarded neither arrogance nor haste. At night, the caravan may have stopped in a ring of low tents or in the walled shelter of a caravanserai, that remarkable type of roadside inn found across many stretches of the ancient trade network. A caravanserai was a place of practical mercy. It offered walls against wind, a courtyard for animals, a place for trade, and a chance to sleep without constantly listening for movement at the edge of darkness. In a good caravanserai, a person might hear the soft clink of tack, the low voices of distant strangers, the cough of a drowsy mule, the crack of a small cooking fire, or the careful pouring of tea. These sounds belong to a world that is busy without being frantic. They are the sounds of effort made sustainable. Not every stop along the road was equally secure, and not every city was equally prosperous. Some flourished because they controlled river traffic, some because they stood near mountain passes, some because they had wells that never dried, some because a ruler invested in walls, markets, libraries, and embassies. Cities on the Silk Road changed over time, sometimes rising unexpectedly and sometimes fading into quieter forms. This too is part of the road's character. Trade routes are living things. They respond to war and peace, to disease and climate, to political unity and fragmentation, to the opening or closing of borders, to the shifting of rivers, to the long, patient erosion of sand. There are old places along the route that now lie in ruin, and their silence has inspired centuries of curiosity. Some were once crowded with merchants and officials, monks and scribes, craftsmen and pilgrims. Now they are often remembered only through broken walls, buried figurines, fragments of silk, faded wall paintings, or the scattered remains of homes and storehouses. In the dry air of Central Asia, certain things survive with surprising tenderness. A piece of cloth can remain folded in the earth for a very long time. A wooden tablet can preserve a message from someone who expected it to be read and then answered. A painted face on a wall can still hold a trace of emotion after whole dynasties have vanished. Archaeology in such places feels almost like listening to the earth speak in a low voice. There are caves painted with Buddhist scenes where travelers once paused to leave offerings or perhaps simply to sit in the cool darkness and rest their minds. Along the edges of some desert routes, monasteries were carved or built into rock, their interiors glowing with fading colors of blue, ochre, and gold. The travelers who passed through such places were not all of one religion, one language, or one nation. They belonged to many faiths and carried many beliefs, and the Silk Road, for all its trade in material goods, was also a road of ideas. Buddhism traveled east in forms both devotional and philosophical. Islam spread across broad regions with its own networks of scholarship, law, and commerce. Christianity appeared in some communities far from its origins, carried by merchants and missionaries. Zoroastrian traditions, Manichaean communities, local cults, ancestral rituals, and older regional practices all touched the road in different centuries and in different ways. The result was not a neat blending but a living mosaic, uneven and deeply human. One of the most restful things about this history is its refusal to be simple. A single route could mean very different things in different eras. For one empire, it might be a source of revenue. For another, a threat. For a monk, a path towards sacred texts. For a scholar, a corridor of manuscripts and languages. For a nomadic family, a seasonal landscape of possibility. For a farmer in a valley town, it might mean access to salt, iron, cloth, or distant news. The road was never merely commerce. It was administration, tribute, diplomacy, migration, pilgrimage, and imagination. And because it connected so many kinds of life, it also carried rumors, legends, and warnings. Some travelers told stories of lands where trees bore jewels, or where cities were guarded by spirits, or where a river vanished into the earth and emerged again far away. Such stories were not necessarily meant to deceive. They were ways of shaping vastness into memory. When people traveled through unknown terrain, myth was often a form of navigation for the mind. A tale could compress danger into symbol. A miraculous spring could stand in for the fact that water truly was miraculous in the desert. A king with 1,000 eyes could be a metaphor for surveillance, power, or the grandeur of an unfamiliar court. Myths along the Silk Road were as portable as merchants were. They crossed languages and were retold in new accents in new towns under new stars. And there were many stars. The sky above the desert, when cloudless, can seem almost excessive in its patience. The ancient traveler might have used the stars in practical ways, especially where landmarks were scarce, but the stars also offered a kind of companionship. They made the journey feel less solitary. One can imagine a caravan at midnight, all lamps dimmed, all voices lowered, the animals settling into stillness, and above them the sky broad and enduring, as if the heavens themselves had taken up watch. It is easy to understand why so many peoples along the road created cosmologies that linked earthly travel to celestial order. To travel was to participate in a larger motion, one already inscribed in the heavens. The silk itself, which gives the road one of its most famous names, was not simply cloth. It was a sign of refinement, power, diplomatic exchange, and meticulous labor. In the ancient Chinese world, silk production was associated with patience and skill of extraordinary kind. The cultivation of silkworms, the careful feeding of mulberry leaves, the unwinding of delicate threads, the weaving of cloth so fine it could catch light like water, all of this belonged to a hidden economy of expertise. A single robe could embody many hours of organized care. When silk reached distant markets, it carried with it not only beauty but the invisible labor of households, workshops, and imperial systems. It is comforting to think that something so soft and graceful had such a grounded and disciplined origin. Not everything moved on the road was luxurious. Much of it was mundane. Grain, paper, salt, ceramics, leather, felt, tools, and medicine all traveled as well. Paper in particular had a quiet revolution hidden inside it. As knowledge moved more easily from place to place, so did administration, religion, and literature. A letter could be sent more cheaply, a contract could be copied, a scripture could be multiplied, a map could be redrawn, a poem could survive the forgetfulness of one city by finding a reader in another. The Silk Road helped to spread not only goods but methods of preserving memory. In a sense, it taught civilizations how to speak to one another across distance and time. The paper-making techniques that spread westward and later transformed entire intellectual worlds remind us that history often turns on humble materials. The same is true of ink, the kind of small and carefully prepared substance that allows thought to remain visible. One can imagine a scribe in a dim room, perhaps in a border city, trimming a reed pen and watching the tip darken. Outside, the market might still be awake. Inside, the movement is tiny, exact, almost silent. Such scenes do not always enter the grand summaries of history, but they are what history is made of. A civilization's memory can rest in the hand of one person who takes care with a line. If one follows the Silk Road eastward in the imagination, one eventually encounters the long and elegant influence of Chinese dynasties, their bureaucracies, their court rituals, their foreign contacts, their border policies, their guarded respect for knowledge. If one follows it westward, one passes through the Persian spheres, the Central Asian kingdoms, the cities of the Islamic Golden Age, the Mediterranean, and beyond. But the road itself never belonged to only one center. It was not a possession, even when rulers tried to claim it. It was more like a shared condition. Empires rose around it, taxed it, protected it, feared it, or used it to project prestige. Yet the road's deeper reality remained ordinary and stubborn. People needed to move, and so they did. In some periods, those movements were shaped by powerful states. The Han dynasty in China, for example, connected imperial interests with Western roots. Later, the Tang era saw a cosmopolitan openness in which foreign merchants, musicians, envoys, and religious figures could appear in major cities with relative freedom. In Central Asia, Sogdian merchants became famous as intermediaries, skilled in languages and trade, moving confidently across regions that others considered distant. Their presence is one of the quiet marvels of the Silk Road. They show how some societies became expert in the art of belonging briefly and usefully in many places at once. Their letters and inscriptions, found far from their homeland, still carry an intimate human tone. They speak of business, yes, but also of family anxieties and the loneliness of travel. The road also connected distant artistic traditions in ways that are easy to overlook. A pattern on a textile might echo a motif from another culture. A religious mural might borrow a pose, a halo, a garment fold, or a decorative border from a faraway school. Coins could carry symbols that traveled more widely than armies. Sculptures might absorb elements from Greek, Iranian, Indian, and Chinese styles, creating forms that seem at once familiar and strange. In the stillness of a museum, one can look at such an object and feel the accumulated patience inside it. No single hand designed the whole world of influences that shaped it. It emerged from contact, from imitation, from memory, from being seen by someone who had once seen something else elsewhere. The Silk Road was one of the great theatres of this slow and continuous borrowing. Some of the most moving remnants are those that survived not because they were valuable to later collectors, but because they were left behind in ordinary settings. A sealed room in a desert house, a library hidden in a cave, a bundle of letters, a fragment of painted silk, a ledger scratched with names and goods. These are not dramatic objects in the cinematic sense, yet they feel close to real human breathing. They tell us that the people of the road were concerned with inventory, rent, grain, seasonal change, and the practicalities of moving safely through a difficult world. A merchant could be both adventurous and cautious. A monk could be both devoted and worldly, in the sense of understanding roots, patrons, and politics. A local official could both collect taxes and worry about floods. The road did not erase ordinary life. It multiplied its forms. At night, the cultural exchange of the Silk Road can be imagined as a quieter kind of listening. A Buddhist chant may have drifted across a courtyard where a Persian merchant was speaking to an interpreter. Somewhere nearby, a local child may have been learning to count with pebbles. An official could have been dictating a letter to a scribe. In another room, spices from India could have been measured into tiny amounts for sale, while horse tack from the steps hung from a beam. The mingling of these lives was not always harmonious, but it was often practical, and practicality can be a gentle force. It makes room where ideology might not. There is a particularly calm fascination in thinking about borderlands. Borders on the Silk Road were not always fixed lines. They could be mountain thresholds, river crossings, garrison towns, fortified gates, checkpoints, or areas of informal influence. To live near a border was to become accustomed to uncertainty and negotiation. Such places often produced skilled translators, guides, and go-betweens. People there understood that the world was layered. A place could belong to one administrative order and another cultural memory at the same time. This is one reason why the history of the road feels so modern, even when it is ancient. The human experience of crossing, translating, adapting, and dwelling between systems has never really disappeared. There are too the quieter forms of devotion that traveled. Pilgrims moved with gifts, prayers, and intention. Some traveled to sacred caves, others to major shrines, others to ancestral sites. A pilgrimage is a special kind of journey because it gives rest a purpose and movement a direction. Along the Silk Road, sacred geography was often overlapping and plural. A mountain might be holy to one community and important for trade to another. A spring might be revered for its healing power and also valued as a source of water. An old tree by the roadside might accumulate legends in one century and practical use in another. The sacred and the practical were never entirely separate. They illuminated each other in passing. And then there are the horses, the beasts of burden, the pack animals, and the riders who guided them. The steppe world, often neighboring the settled cities of the Silk Road, contributed its own history of movement. Nomadic confederations, pastoral migrations, horse cultures, and seasonal encampments all interacted with the urban centers and empires of the road. The horse was one of the great connective creatures of Eurasian history. It changed warfare, diplomacy, communication, and prestige, but it also changed daily life by making distance feel less absolute. A horse can seem, in the right light, like a creature born from wind and intention. To see a herd moving at dusk across a plain is to understand why so many cultures linked horses with nobility, freedom, and the divine. Still, even the horse gave way to the camel in certain landscapes, and the camel in turn bowed to the mule or the donkey where those were more suitable. The Silk Road was practical enough to value what worked. This is another reason it feels so humane. It was not a romantic fantasy of universal connectivity. It was a series of accommodations to terrain. A mountain pass required different judgment than a salt flat. A river valley demanded a different pace than a sand sea. Some routes were open in certain seasons and impossible in others. Snow could close one corridor while drought transformed another. The road was always in conversation with the earth. That earth, especially in regions like the Taklamakan or the Gobi, can seem almost dreamlike in its severity. Deserts are often described as empty, but they are not empty at all. They are full of measures, intervals, hazards, silences, and hidden thresholds. A traveller might follow a chain of oases like beads on a string, each one a small offering of water, shade, and human contact. In such places, life became a negotiation with scarcity. Wells were prized. Dates, melons, and hardy grains meant comfort. Walls reduced the wind. Gardens were not just beautiful but symbolic little islands of order in a wider field of dryness. One can imagine a courtyard in an oasis town where vines climbed a trellis and a basin reflected the moon. Such scenes must have felt like mercies. The ruins of certain Silk Road towns still show how carefully people arranged life against difficult surroundings. Mud brick walls, defensive towers, irrigation channels, storage pits, communal ovens, shrines, and courtyards all reveal a society attentive to continuity. A settlement did not survive by chance. It survived through shared labor and accumulated knowledge. People understood how to direct water, how to preserve grain, how to house animals, how to repair roofs, how to negotiate with neighbors, how to honor ancestors, how to welcome strangers. These skills are easy to miss because they are not spectacular, yet they are the foundation of civilization. The road carried spectacular goods, but it was built on the humble intelligence of maintenance. There is also a melancholy side to the Silk Road, and it is worth resting with gently because melancholy is not always sorrowful. It can be a recognition that time changes the scale of every human endeavor. Many cities that once flourished have now become names in books, or perhaps only the faint outlines of walls under sand. Languages once heard in marketplaces are partly lost or preserved only in fragments. Dynasties that taxed caravans have vanished. Temples have been abandoned. Trade patterns shifted when sea routes became more dominant, when political boundaries hardened, when new powers redirected wealth and attention. Yet the very disappearance of some centers makes the memory of them more luminous. What survives becomes precious. There are still unresolved questions that make the history feel alive. Certain routes are known only in part. Some old settlements remain imperfectly understood. Certain manuscripts have not been fully interpreted. Some artifacts appear in places far from their presumed origins, and scholars continue to debate how they moved. This uncertainty does not weaken the story, it deepens it. The Silk Road was never a perfectly mapped institution. It was a world of gaps, and the gaps are where wonder lives. When a historian encounters a broken record, the imagination is invited to rest beside it, not to invent recklessly, but to acknowledge how much of human life always remains unwritten. And perhaps that is why the Silk Road feels so suitable to the night. It is a history of movement, but also of pauses. It is a history of exchange, but also of waiting. A caravan must rest, a city must sleep, a letter must travel, a decision must be delayed, a river must be crossed when the weather allows, a treaty must be sealed after long discussion, a child must learn a new language slowly, a craftsman must acquire a technique through years of observation. A belief must be carried carefully from one land to another and then adapted to a new climate of thought. Everything happens in sequence, and sequence is soothing when one is tired. The small domestic scenes are often the most peaceful to imagine. In one house, a mother could be sorting lentils under lamplight while her son folds a piece of cloth for market. In another, a grandfather might be telling a story about the distant sea, though he has never seen it himself. In a scholar's room, a stack of papers waits beside a cup of cooling tea. In a stable, a groom brushes a camel's coat with slow strokes. In a kitchen, cardamom and cumin release their fragrance into the dark. In a guest room, a traveller lies awake for a moment, listening to wind move around the eaves, grateful for a roof. These are the actual textures of the road's civilization, and they are peaceful because they belong to ordinary human care. The Silk Road also reminds us that knowledge has always been mobile. Medical texts crossed languages. Astronomical ideas traveled with traders and scholars. Calendar systems, methods of navigation, architectural techniques, and philosophical concepts all made journeys. A physician in one city might inherit an approach developed in another. A mapmaker might incorporate reports from caravans. An artisan might learn a glaze recipe from a foreign workshop. In this way, the road helped create intellectual humility. It became harder to believe that wisdom belonged only to one place. There was always another center somewhere beyond the horizon, and that awareness encouraged curiosity rather than certainty. Even the sounds of the road would have been varied and layered. The bells on pack animals, the creak of wheels where carts were used, the tapping of sandals on stone, the rustle of silk in a stall, the call of a vendor, the recitation of prayer, the laugh of children, the murmur of bargaining, the flap of a tent in the wind, the distant hooves of a patrol, the splash of water being carried, the hush that follows sunset when business is done and the city shifts into domestic rhythm. These sounds, though ordinary, are part of a vast historical music. If one could listen to the Silk Road across centuries, perhaps it would sound less like conquest than like overlapping footsteps. And as the centuries unfolded, those footsteps touched many famous names and many forgotten ones. Alexander's legacy reached into parts of Central Asia, leaving traces of Hellenistic influence in art and urban form. Persian empires shaped administrative and cultural patterns across wide regions. Indian kingdoms contributed philosophical, religious, and commercial networks. Chinese dynasties extended and regulated border trade. Later Islamic caliphates and regional sultanates nurtured scholarship, science, and commerce across immense spaces. The Mongol period, with its vast imperial reach, reconfigured the routes once again, sometimes increasing safety and communication across Eurasia in ways both astonishing and fragile. Yet beneath the empire-scale narrative, individual lives continue to form the true fabric of the road. A weaver at a loom, a translator in a court, a pilgrim carrying a staff, a boy learning to lead a donkey, a widow running a stall, a monk copying a text by candlelight, a caravan leader checking the sky, a potter firing a kiln, a soldier at a gate, a healer measuring herbs, a child asleep in a traveling tent waking to the smell of smoke. These figures are easy to imagine because they are not distant from us in feeling. The material details change, but the human concerns remain steady. It is also worth remembering that the Silk Road was not solely a mail story, not solely a merchant story, not solely an imperial story. Women appear throughout the historical record as patrons, weavers, household managers, religious practitioners, keepers of memory, and sometimes as travelers or figures of political power. Their labor often sustained the continuity of households and workshops that made trade possible. In a world of long-distance movement, domestic stability mattered. The road depended on homes as much as on roads. A family that could prepare, store, mend, and wait made larger commerce possible. This is one of history's quiet truths, and it feels especially fitting to notice it now. The more one reflects on the Silk Road, the more it appears not as a line but as a principle. It is the principle that people are capable of sustained contact across great differences. They can mistrust each other and still trade. They can borrow ideas without surrendering identity. They can preserve old customs while admiring new ones. They can live amid uncertainty and still create systems of trust. The Silk Road was full of risk, but risk did not prevent cooperation. Instead, cooperation was what made risk bearable. That is a lesson as old as the road and as soft as the lantern light that once guided travelers into a walled courtyard at dusk. If one lets the mind wander farther, there are still endless scenes left to consider. A desert market opening just after dawn before the heat rises, with baskets covered in cloth. A scholar comparing versions of the same story in two different scripts. A merchant tasting dried apricots and asking where the orchard lies. A carpenter repairing a wagon wheel in the shade of a wall. A diplomat unrolling a letter sealed with wax. A child playing with a carved animal figurine while adults talk nearby. A prayer mat being shaken free of dust. A jar of oil being packed for the journey. A guide pointing toward a pass that will be safe only until snow begins. Such scenes do not need to hurry. They are meaningful precisely because they unfold slowly. And somewhere beyond all of them, in the deeper distance of the imagination, there is always the night sky over the road. It has watched every empire rise and dim. It has hovered over camps and cities, over abandoned towers and active wells, over temples and granaries, over merchants counting silver and children counting stars. The sky has not changed its patient style of attention. It remains one of the Silk Road's oldest companions. Perhaps that is why the road feels so calm when remembered in darkness. It is accompanied by something vast, something that does not ask for payment or tribute, only presence. So let the map soften now. Let the names of cities become quieter. Let the arguments of historians settle into the background like dust that has finally found a place to rest. Let the oases, the passes, the caravans, the manuscripts, the bells, the spices, the silks, the horses, the camels, and the old stone walls all drift into one another until they are no longer separate images, but a single, mellow impression of passage and endurance. The Silk Road, after all, was a way of going on. It carried people, things, beliefs, and stories across distances that once seemed immense. And in the end, what it carried most faithfully was the human hope that somewhere beyond the next horizon, there might be rest, welcome, and a light waiting in the dark.